Good morning everyone. Today we're going to differentially harden this beautiful Viking Seax right here. Let's see how we get on. I hope you enjoy. Thanks for coming along.
Quite a bit of trees came down in the last bit of storm, but right here. Luckily though, it doesn't cross the way to my forge anymore, so we're good. Since I want to put a hamon on this, and I will explain what that is in just a bit, I'm going to leave the blade as thick as it is right now, at least here in the middle. I'm still going to adjust the thickness at the tip basically, because it's still a little thick there, but back here it's like roughly 1 millimeter, which is the least I want to have for doing an interrupted quench, which is going to put a lot of stress on the blade. What is a hamon? A hamon is basically a line that forms on the blade when you differentially harden it. What does differentially hardening mean? It's basically the process of when you quench the blade, you let it quench at different speeds. To harden a blade, which is what you want for good edge retention, for keeping an edge sharp over a longer time, you want it to be hard. So what you do is you bring it up from a very specific temperature. For this steel 1075 or C75, it's 820 degrees, down really quickly within seconds or milliseconds depending on your quench medium, and that creates a different crystalline structure which is going to represent a hard steel. Now, a differential hardening works basically by resisting the heat on the spine of the blade by, for example, applying clay, and that lets this part cool down slower than the edge, which is going to keep this a lot softer. Allegedly that gives you more shock absorption, so when you whack this knife into something, the shock transfers from the edge to the spine. It also gives you a very, very aesthetic line right across the blade. So, this is what this stuff looks like, and we're now going to thin it down with water until we get the proper viscosity. You'll have to play around with this until you find what works for you. There's no set formula for how to properly mix up the clay for hamons. Next up, I'm going to dry that piece in the forge real quick. When you do an interrupted quench and you quench this blade from a really hot temperature to a low temperature in water, and there's still wet clay underneath it, it just explodes. Like not the blade, but the clay explodes. Alright, that's good enough. And what you basically want to do is keep on heating the blade up until the point where it no longer smokes. while, a couple of days in fact, since I've last worked on the Viking Seax project, because I did this quick little interlude of making this little friction folder right here, which turned out quite nicely with beautiful Cocobolo handle scales. If you want to know how I did this, there's some dirt on it. If you want to know how I did this, check out the last video I made. It's called Making a Friction Folder from a File, and as there's only 3 videos on this channel, I think you will be okay in finding it. But we've got this blade clayed up right here. It's quite a beefy blade. It's gonna be nice. The clay is all the way hardened. The blade is already normalized from before I actually attached the clay on it. And next up is just going to be the quench, where I heat it up. And I'm going to check the blade edge with a magnet, because that's a way to tell whether or not the blade has reached the temperature where you want to quench it. And especially if you have clay on it where you cannot judge the color, usually I go by color. If you have if you know your light in your forge, basically, you can judge by the color, okay, what temperature it has roughly. For plain carbon steels like I use, for example, 1075, that's good enough. But if you do a hamon and you have like this clay over here, it can sometimes be difficult to judge the color of it, basically. So what I do is use a magnet to basically tell when it loses magnetism. Alright, that's the point to quench it, because once it's reached the critical temperature, is what we call it, it also loses magnetism around that temperature. So that's what I'm going for. As I said, it's already normalized, and next up we're going to heat it up. And I'm going to do an interrupted quench, which means I'm going to dump this into water and then after a couple of seconds into oil. That is going to give me a more active hamon because of the quicker quench in water, but also reduces the amount or the possibility of fracturing the blade, because I then move it into the oil, which is usually a little softer quench. It's not as aggressive and lowers the risk of actually cracking or warping the blade. After that, I'm going to go straight to the vise and clamp this piece in there, potentially correct it, because you usually have 10 to 30 seconds, depending on the source you read from, to straighten the blade, because it's not yet as brittle. And after that, we're going to temper it, which means softening the steel up a little, because after hardening it, it's glass hard, so you could smack it on a table and it would just shatter into a bunch of pieces. And basically by tempering it, you heat it up to roughly 200 degrees Celsius. That's going to reduce the brittleness and gonna give you a more tough and durable blade. Alright, we're going to get on to working with that, and thanks for coming along. Let's hope you enjoy this, and let's hope this doesn't break or warp on me. You can basically see my quenching setup right here. I've adjusted it a little for the camera. This is my canister with oil. This is just basic canola oil, something you can use to harden plain carbon steels. It actually works quite well, and I've basically used this tube to also quench swords, which is the reason I don't just have a smaller bucket. And this right here is my container with just plain water. And what I'm going to do once I've got this blade, I'm going to pull it out, dip it into this water for like 3 seconds, pull it out and put it into the oil. looks pretty straight. That's straight. It works. Not a problem at all. That part that you see right here, that's really light gray, that's usually the martensite forming. And you can see basically exactly where the clay was, and you can see the line that's already forming there. We're going to grind this, and then we're going to check how it looks on a quick edge before actually polishing it up. Before the blade actually is ready to be ground, because right now it's so extremely hard, if I dropped it, it would probably shatter. I need to temper it, which means I'm going to go at a relatively low heat. For this steel, I'm going to go with roughly 200 degrees and soften it up a little. I'm going to do a forge temper for the first part, which means I'm just going to heat it up till I see a golden straw color, which is usually what I want for a knife. Once I'm home, I'm going to temper this in the oven at 200 degrees Celsius, so it gets properly done. But for now, just to grind it a little, this is going to be enough. I've got the forge turned down way low. Alright, and we're getting the color I want. You might be able to pick up the light golden straw color we've got all along the edge. Now, you gotta know that usually when you do a proper temper cycle, you should do it for 2 hours at the desired time to actually soak it all the way through. I'm going to do that at home in my toaster oven actually, just so I have this properly tempered. But to grind it, it's sufficient to do a forge temper. So it's fine if you do a forge temper. I did my first couple of knives with that, and if you use the right steel and you take your time with it and you don't overheat or underheat it, it's alright, but it's not the optimum. And one nice thing about Hamones is when you see a Hamone on a blade, you know that it's hardened. But also, so you know, this easily skates a fire. Generally, you can rely on it. If it skates across and you can't really mar the blade with it, that's when you know you've got a hardened blade. Alright, we're going to get to the grinding as soon as this is a little cooler. Last time we left off with an 80 grit, I'm going to jump straight to a 120 grit now, just to go a little quicker with it, and then we're going to do a test edge to see how it worked out. Okay, so we've got a very diluted solution of ferric chloride right here, which is an etchant many people use for knife making. And I've already seen the Hamone while grinding. Even at a low 120 grit polish, it was already visible. So now let's quickly give this a degrease. The grind, of course, is not yet clean, especially this side. There's a lot of wobble right here, but I will be able to correct that later. Always wear eye protection when you're working with any sort of etchant. Once in your eye and you might have got a whole bit of trouble for the rest of your life. Alright, quickly in. And we've got our pattern right here. But yeah, this is what we've got right now. And you can see the line decently clearly, I believe. Of course, this is not the final polish, and on this kind of polish you also don't see it as well. The only unfortunate thing is down here, it did not, the way I clayed the blade means that this part of the blade, this back part right here, has not properly hardened. But that's something I will have to deal with now, and since this is not the part you usually cut with, I'm alright with that. But you can see the line going all over the blade. That's a Hamone. The other side is a little clearer. Yeah, there we go. There you can see the hamon all the way across. Okay, this is where we're going to stop for today. We've got the blade on a 120 grit finish, but of course there still needs to be done a lot of grinding. Next time I'm going to go back to the 80 grit actually to properly get in these bevels, because there's still plenty of material that I kept there intentionally so the blade would not warp or crack during hardening. The hardening was a success. The hamon is already pretty much visible even just when grinding it. I've decided to put a hand sanded finish on this just to make the hamon pop, else it doesn't really make much sense to put a hamon on that if you don't do a hand sanded finish, in my opinion. And I will put this piece of mesa birch onto it, which I think also fits the theme of the weapons of the Vikings. So if you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a like or a comment. I'd be really grateful for any kind of feedback. And I hope you keep on following along, as this knife is going towards the close. That's going to be it for today. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, be sure to leave a like or a comment and stay up to date with this series. If you enjoy this, be sure to also follow me on Instagram. I will keep you up to date there too about the episodes that are coming out. Until that time, I hope you have a great day and see you next time. Goodbye.